After nearly 27 years, Saudi Arabia and Iraq have decided to reopen the border closed since 1990. Why have the two countries chosen this time to renew their relationship? What are the implications behind this decision? Iraqi Shiites are closely related to Iran, while Saudi Arabia is the most influential Sunni country in the Middle East. Do closer Saudi-Iraqi ties pose any threat to Iran? The diversification of the Saudi economic structure is not a new concept, and the Saudi Deputy Crown Prince recently unveiled his country's 2030 vision aimed at reducing dependence on oil. What can we expect from this vision? The diplomatic storm towards Qatar has lasted more than 2 months, in which 4 countries led by Saudi Arabia have been putting pressure on Qatar with sanctions. However, on August 16th, Saudi Arabia announced its borders would be open to pilgrims from Qatar, but that only Saudi airlines could transport the pilgrims. What's the meaning behind this offer?
Recently, Saudi Arabia and Iraq announced plans to open the Arab border crossing for trade for the first time since 1990. With relations improving, some analysts say Saudi Arabia has asked Iraq to mediate with its rival Iran, though the Saudis deny the speculation. But on August 23rd, Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said the delegations from Iran and Saudi Arabia will exchange diplomatic visits soon. Will Iran restore relations with Saudi Arabia? What role is Iraq playing in Iran-Saudi Arabia relations? And what will be the consequences for the wider Middle East? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined by He Wenping, Research Fellow with the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Anna Tangen, Current Affairs Commentator. Also, Meir Javdan Far, a Middle East analyst from Israel, and Serkan Aral, a political analyst and writer in Turkey, will join us in this panel discussion of our satellite. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Well, is it a devastating earthquake for the Middle East, although it's a good one for Saudi Arabia and Iran to mend their ties? Do you think this is a way too dramatic to be accepted as true?
Oh, well, yeah, this is a big surprise for me when I heard these two rivals, time rivals, suddenly exchange goodwills to each other. So even I doubt is this true news or is just some fake one. But when you look at something in deeper, from the surface to deeper, it is also understanding, especially this because this Iraqi now is in the middle, becoming the middle player. So I think this is from their own both concern, because from Iran, now they are under the new round of sanctions from the US. So that's why all those information seems now has been released from Iranian side. So they want to find a new partner in the Middle East to unite together to counter the biggest enemy now is the US rather than the Iran, rather than the Saudi Arabia. So this is the perspective from the Iranian side.
I really have strong doubts as to whether Iraq will play the role of a bridge connecting Iran with Saudi Arabia, because Iraq itself is quite divided between different Shiite factions, like Mustafa Sadr, former head of a Mahdi army. I mean, he has his own ambition, and he has long displayed dissatisfaction with the Persian state of Iran. So what do you think of him, Sadr being used as a client or an ally of Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think there are economic reasons why Saudi Arabia is getting closer to Iran. Quite frankly, their break-even, given how much oil they're producing, is 74 a barrel. Currently, world oil prices are at 54. However, Iran can satisfy its obligations at $40 a barrel. So every year that goes by with a price below that 74 break-even, their quote enemy, Iran, is getting stronger, and they are growing weaker. And it's escaped no one's notice that they're putting Aramco, which it was sworn would never be sold, on the auction block in terms of opening it up for shares. So in terms of any kind of relationship between them, yes, it has to be Iraq, because that is where the battlefield is between Sunni and Shia. So unless that gets settled, you cannot have something. So this is the logical first step in these two powers coming together. I think, and I would agree with my colleague, uncertainty about Donald Trump, what he's trying to do, where he's going, how reliable he is, the threat of terrorism to both sides. these are elements where there would be a very fertile ground to sit down and talk and come to resolution.
Obviously, the ambitious young Crown Prince Salman is clearly aware of the rapid shrinking of the forex reserve of Saudi Arabia and perhaps the serious mistakes that he has made in Yemen, where he is fighting the proxy war with Shiites and their supporters who enjoy the strong backing from the Persian state of Iran. Therefore, he is trying to coming back to the normal track by revitalizing the economy, which is the most fundamental, most important issue for the future of the Middle East kingdom. Therefore, but this calculus may have left Israel marginalized. Let's go to a Middle East expert who's from Israel, Mr. Meir Javad Danfar, for his comments on what's going on there and what is the what are the considerations of Tel Aviv facing the sectarian violence and perhaps the latest silver lining in having a thaw in the relationship between Riyadh and Tehran? Hello.
Hello there.
So, go ahead.
The reaction of the, yes, sure. The reaction of the Israeli government hasn't really reacted to the thaw, as you put it. We don't, well, to be honest with you, I think it's early days. There's a lot of differences, very serious differences between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Of course, what we see is a change for the better, that the two sides are going to exchange diplomatic meetings. But I would say it's a bit too early to call it a thaw yet, because there are serious differences. As my colleague in the studio said, Iraq is one area of major difference between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but there's another greater area of difference where the two sides differ greatly, and that's Syria, and where both sides are supporting the opposing sides in Syria, and we are again nowhere near a solution for Syria, and as you quite rightly said, also the question of Yemen. But if we assume the scenario right now that at a maximalist approach, in a perfect room temperature experiment, that yes, Iran and Saudi Arabia have sorted out all their problems and are back to where they were before, I would say yes, that would not be to the interest of Israel. Israel took great advantage of the time, for example, when the Iranians burned down the Saudi embassy in Tehran, and they basically pushed the Saudis to the side of Israel. So now if the two sides can make up, it would not be to the interest of Israel, but I would have to say also Israel is responsible, because it didn't make the best of the opportunity. From when there were differences between Iran and Saudi Arabia, Israel could have improved its relations with the Saudis by stopping expansion of settlements, but it didn't.
Perhaps Israel has benefited most from the rise of ISIL as well as the sectarian violence since the invasion of Iraq in 2003, because it used to be public enemy #1 for all critical players in the Middle East. Now, do you, excuse me, do you, Mayor, do you take the possible rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia as a serious threat to Israel, since the former president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, denied not only the Holocaust, but also vowed to eliminate Israel from the map of the world? With his ouster, I mean, he's gone, politically perhaps, but do you believe there still exists a serious threat to Israel?
Well, I would have to say, to be fair, the Iranian president, Mr. Rouhani, has tried to reduce the hostile rhetoric towards the state of Israel, and that's very noticeable. But in Iran, when it comes to making foreign policy, especially towards the state of Israel, it's not the government that has the biggest say, it's the Revolutionary Guard and the Supreme Leader. And both are vehemently anti-Israel. And I would say what is a bigger threat than a Saudi-Iranian rapprochement is the increasing presence of Iran on in our northern border with Syria. You know, before there were there are 20,000 right now Hezbollah fighters in Lebanon who, as we know, we've been to war against them, and they now have, whereas in the last war in 2006 they fired 4,000 missiles at Israel, in the next war they will have 120,000 missiles at their disposal to fire at Israel. And now, and this is where the bigger threat is for Israel, those 20,000 Hezbollah fighters could be supplemented by another 20,000 pro-Iranian fighters, Shia fighters from countries such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, and of course with Iranian special forces training them and advising them and sometimes fighting along them. So this is the biggest threat right now which Israel faces from Iran. You know, I understand that Iran wants to fill that vacuum. It's an opportunity that they want to take in Syria by replacing ISIS. But the more they get closer to our border with Syria, the more the chances of a conflict with the state of Israel would exist.
Thank you so much,
Mayor
Javad Anfar, a Middle East analyst from Israel. Let me go to Mr. Serkan Oral, a political analyst and a writer in Turkey, for his comments on the latest reconfiguration well underway between Iraq and Saudi Arabia, who severed their relationship since 1990 when Saddam Hussein, former president and dictator of Iraq, invaded Kuwait and was ousted from his presidency in 2003 by the United States. Well, what do you think of the latest?
I think Saudi Arabia's decision is strategically important at this time. I call this it's a new thing. It's a proactive foreign policy from the Saudi side. Let's see the three important conflict points. First, Qatar. There is a huge conflict. The second, Yemen. Still, the influence of Iran is highly in Yemen. And third, of course, the future of the Islamic leadership, who will be. So the question, of course, you ask is shaping on this. It is the first step from the Saudi side to have some good deals with Iraq. Now Iraq is coming again into the Arab world, but later it seems that the influence of Iran in Iraq, the aim of Saudi side is this. There will be lots of important meetings with Riyadh and Tehran to solve the problems they had before. So the timing is at this time.
What's the position of Ankara in the latest realignment movement? For example, it seems President Erdogan has decided to align Turkey with Russia, Iran, and perhaps other anti-US forces such as Hamas and even not President Assad in fighting yet another side of the axis in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and other members of the GCC. What is your fundamental position about the reconfiguration here?
Ankara is trying to reduce the tension in the region. Last week, Erdogan visited Riyadh and deal with the King of Saudi Arabia, including the Iran issues. After that, the steps are coming. Iran and Saudi Arabia should meet in a point in the next future. You're right, Turkey has some problems with the border side, especially the PKK and PYD terrorist organizations. And now Iran, Saudi Arabia and Iraq are coming together against these organizations. And including at this side, we can see Russia and Qatar. But the other side, Saudi-led coalition, including Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and some part of Israel is on the other side. So the strategical tension, both important for Iraq. It seems that three-parted Iraq, the south, the middle, and the north side, there will be also a referendum for the Kurdistan side or northern side of the Iraq. So Turkey and Iran, they had the same worries on this issue. It's a natural thing that if the tension is getting down, the people of Iraq and Syria will be happy. So the aim of the policies are going on like that.
Thank you so much for being with us. Wenping and Anna, what do you think of the immediate challenges that this young Crown Prince Salman is facing at the moment? Is it the issue of industrialization, for example, the vision of 2030, or is it more about ending the proxy war in Yemen and perhaps gradually phasing out its support from the rebels in Syria, the war-torn country in the Middle East? Or do you think it's more about the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia on the external front so that it can reorient its focus on the domestic rebuilding? Because without the oil reserves, without the oil prices to support this royal family, Saudi Arabia allegedly won't have any future, right?
Yeah, of course, those domestic concerns and the international relations concern, they're all intertwined with each other. So I think for the moment, the most important thing, challenging thing, is how to resolve those like diplomatic problem with the Qatar, and also how to withdraw out from those war in the Yemen, because those Yemen war actually has sucked in a lot of resources, financial resources from the Saudi. So that's why I think from this moment, this Junior Solomon now put forward this very ambitious idea. So how to get along with the Iran, and especially how to get its own influence in this post-ISIL era in Iraqi. So Iraqi is not only a middleman. My very first comments, I didn't have time to spell it out. Only past the words, but also he's also very important player, because from the Sadar's visit to the Saudi, we can see even this Sadar himself, he wants to establish his own status in this post-ISIL era. Now it's coming. His eyes on next year's parliament election. Now he's changed himself, his image, not only a leader representing this Shia. Now he wants to be a leader of all those Iraqi people. So that's why he wants to, from this visit to Saudi, send back a message to those Sunni people in the Israel, in the Iraqi.
I doubt many of them are going to forget what the Mahdi army was doing way back when. Quite frankly, I don't agree. I think Iraq is a mess. It's in danger of being partitioned. It's unresolved. Unless something happens, you could have even more problems with a three-part partition, literally, between Sunni,
Kurds.
Shia, and Kurds. So you have a destabilization of the state. This could be like the partition of Poland. There has to be somebody adult stepping in. Now, this young Solomon has some issues. He tried some adventuresome in Yemen. It did not work. It's been a disaster. They could be facing war crimes tribunals because of this, both sides. I'm not blaming either in particular. But that didn't work out. The whole thing with Qatar is further destabilizing things. It's not helping. Now, the U.S., what is the U.S. doing? They said, well, you're our friend, but the U.S. is pumping out oil even faster and faster, and now entering the international market. It's now the leading oil producer in the world. This is not going to help Saudi Arabia stabilize the price, which we all agree they have to do if they're going to go forward and maintain it. So I think this young man, who hopes to be an old leader, is looking at what the realities are. And then financially, politically, things are looking grim. It's time to get together, put aside some perhaps religious animosities, and figure out what the practical thing is. And I think that's helpful, but not maybe to Israel.
Thank you so much. Let me go back to Mr. Mayor Javdafar, the Middle East analyst from Israel. Hello. What do you think of the dynamics of Iraqi politics? Do you think Mr. Sadar is being used by Saudi Arabia as a client or as an ally to introduce a kind of a Shiite civil strife? Everybody understands that this young leader of very influential Shiite cleric, Mr. Sadar, is not very happy about the growing presence of Iran in his country, because Iran supported some of the armed groups' militias in fighting ISIL. Now, with the victory on the ground, do you think Iran is making more aggressive intrusion into the turfs of this young leader, Mr. Sadar, and therefore he's angry? He seeks help and support from Saudi Arabia to sort of neutralize the ambition of the Persian state, which is obviously rising very fast with the lifting out of arms of economic sanctions by the Obama administration.
Well, from what I understand from some of my Iraqi colleagues, Mr. Muqtada al-Sadr he's a master politician in that he takes every opportunity to show himself as a candidate who is not answerable to any foreign government, and this is something in Iraqi politics which is apparently being valued. Some people see it as being populistic, others seem to appreciate it, but what seems to be the key issue here is this. Iraq is now entering a new phase. There's going to be a Kurdish referendum on the 25th of September. It is without doubt the people of Kurdistan in northern Iraq are going to approve of this. This is going to undermine the popularity of the current Prime Minister of Iraq, Mr. El-Abadi. Some people are going to blame him for not stopping this Kurdish referendum. So again, we see here an opportunity for somebody else to come and threaten the position of El-Abadi. And this is what Muqtada al-Sadr is doing. Before he did it by ordering his people to invade the green zone. We saw that, I think it was last year, in Baghdad, to complain about the issue of corruption. That was another way of threatening the government of President Mr. El-Abadi. Now he's doing it by saying, yes, I'm an independent politician. Whether it will succeed, it remains to be seen. But Iraqi politics is about to become even more complicated after the referendum in the Kurdish regional government.
What do you think of the impact of the upcoming elections in the National Assembly of Iraq? Do you think Muqtada al-Sadr has his own political agenda running for perhaps a president or prime minister? I don't know, but what do you think of his political agenda in shaping his policy towards Saudi Arabia?
Well, I have to remember, while he says that he's unhappy against Iran being a player in Iraq, he received his religious training in the city of Qom in Iran. While he says that he's against, again, the military intervention of Iran, his militia, the Sayar al-Sulh, which means the peace brigades, are part of the popular mobilization force, Hasht al-Shabi, which is commanded by Iran. So, you know, while he's making all these claims, this is why, as I said before, some people think he's just being populist. But what is certain here is that he wants to be the future leader of Iraq. He wants to be the future leader of not just the Shia, but also the Sunni. Now, he knows that the Sunni are unhappy with Iranian involvement and Iranian influence in Iraq, which is why he's now playing the card of I'm unhappy about Iranian presence. Whereas we know, as I said, he was incorporating with the Iranians before. Whether he will succeed, there are a lot of open issues. We have to see what happens after the referendum. And here's the concern. Here's the concern. As the Kurds hold the referendum, they're going to hold it near the city of Kirkuk. The Arabs are against that. So what threatens the future of Iraq more than Muqtada al-Sadr being populistic is a possible military clash between the Kurdish Peshmerga and the Shia forces over the Kirkuk issue after the referendum, because the Shia militia are going to be against Kirkuk being declared as part of a future Kurdish region.
We understand the grave concerns of the Turks about the possible independence of Kurdistan in northern Iraq. That will threaten to align millions of Kurds in the Middle East behind the banner of their nationalist sentiments and perhaps having their own homeland eventually. Let me go back to Mr. Serkan Aral, a political analyst and writer in Turkey. Now, we are aware that Muqtada Sadr is using UMO, UMO is, you know, broader than religious influence. It refers more to, UMO refers more to the religious sectarian impact. However, nation state is what he often quotes in shaping his own foreign policy rhetoric. Does that indicate clearly that he is a more liberal, a more international mind compared with other Shiite clerics in this region? What does that mean for, you know, rebuilding Iraq in the future?
This is important for the future of the Iraq and also the leadership of the Islamic era. Saudi Arabia will pay $10 million aid quickly, and especially for the future of Iraq. The reconstruction, they need $100 billion for the new cities and the construction. This important visit show that they will start with the Shia parts of Iraq, and then Muqtada al-Sadr will mediate Saudi Arabia and Iran in the near future for the relations and the tensions, making them lower. So the entrance of Saudi Arabia to Iraq will be the first step to break down the influence of Iran. It shows like that.
Very quickly, what's your answer to my next question about the role China plays in the current process of reconfiguration? What do you think of the Belt and Road Initiative, for example? The Belt and Road Initiative that promises to do more to connect all players along the stretches of the land Silk Road. Mr. Oral?
Is Iran a friend or not a friend for the Arab countries? That is the question. Turkey is becoming a bridge between Arabs and non-Arabs. So it will take a step. We can't give an answer now, but in the near future we will see Iran's influence in Qatar, the Qatar relations, and in Yemen conflict is very important. And Saudi-led coalition have Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Egypt together. But the other side, the Qatar is supported by Iran and also Turkey.
Thank you so much.
This is an important question for that.
Thank you so much. Wenping, very quickly, what do you think of the blueprint of President Xi Jinping in being involved further in the Middle East through the Belt and Road Initiative?
Well, both those Iran and Saudi, I think all those very important country for China's Belt Road Initiative construction in the Middle East. I still remember last year when those two countries cut diplomacy at that time, and President Xi Jinping still against all those ideas, saying maybe it's not a good time to visit those two countries because they are fighting. But President Xi Jinping continued to visit both of them. Because we are not involved with the bilateral those relations, but we are just talking one by one about the China's Belt Road Initiative, how to engage with their own, like those industrialization vision, like 2020 or 2030. So certainly, I think we were happy to see those countries. They have a good relation with themselves. That will be good. That be super. But now I want to say this is just a trend. Now it's far from reality yet.
And what do you think of China's image and role in this volatile region? Do you view China's Belt and Road Initiative as more of an opportunity or a threat to the U.S. interests in this region?
No, it's an opportunity. I mean, the U.S. doesn't have an interest in having the Middle East issue at peace. There's no benefit to us, even with the cheap oil prices and things like this. It would be doing the world a favor. But the problem is, China can bring the door to prosperity, but these countries have to enter it. And if they decide to interrupt the Belt and Road for their own narrow interests, this could have an impact on China. So it's going to have to be very careful sailing. China has, as my colleague said, trying to negotiate this by not being non-ideological. We're here to trade and trade alone.
Yes, indeed. The only most encouraging, if not promising, mega project in the Middle East, for example, or in South Asia, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, has already caused an uproar in Indian politics about their concern on Kashmir and the line of control there. Well, we're going to do more to assess the risks before we unfold more of our blueprint, our Belt and Road Initiative. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.